This episode is proudly supported by Pepe Sayer Australian Cultured Butter.
At Pepe Sayer, we focus on quality. So if someone comes into your restaurant and they see you're using Pepe Sayer, they know immediately that that is a quality product you've got in front of you on the table. And that comes from a decade of just doing quality butter day after day.
For more information, go to pepesayer.com.au.
The thing with pork is that if you discover a great marinade, I mean, it marinates so well. So, and I love the fact that you can have a marinade with a certain amount of sugar, and you just get lovely caramelization, which just adds to the natural sweetness and texture of the pork. So I'd say just experiment with marinades.
This is The Crackling. I'm Anthony Huckstep. One of the beautiful things about a career in food is the ability to immerse yourself in another culture and cuisine, to learn the produce, the techniques, and the manner in which to break bread. For Mark Jensen, a career in food eventually led to an exploration of Vietnamese food, and with the Nguyen siblings gave Sydney one of its very best Vietnamese offerings. Mark, how are you?
I'm very well, Anthony. How are you?
I'm good. You've had a fascinating career, and it's been a couple of decades now with Red Lantern, and its influence has been incredible. But there was a time in your life, career-wise, where you weren't cooking Vietnamese food at all. What was that transition like for you into Vietnamese cuisine?
Yeah, you're right there. I mean, I started cooking, I was thinking about it about 30 years ago. And back then, I sort of transitioned from a prior profession of hairstyling into cooking. I mean, I guess they both involve sharp blades, so I guess that's the only connection. There's not too many other similarities between the two. One of them's all parties and good times, and the other one's damn hard work. But anyway, yeah, so when I started, I mean, I made the transition. I was in Byron Bay at the time, and I started working as a waiter in a restaurant. And then I really got drawn into the kitchen, so I started washing dishes, and then I moved to the salad section. And I think at that time I was really lucky because the chefs working in that restaurant, they had like military training. They were ex-army chefs, so they were really disciplined, and there was that real brigade structure to the kitchen. And the food was really classic, but like modern, but with that classic sensibility. So it was a really good experience, and being in there and working, and I just really loved the yin and yang of the whole experience, because here were these like big tough ex-army blokes like doing really delicate pastry work and all that sort of stuff, and I just came from this profession where it was like particularly feminine, hairstyling, to be in this world where it's like masculine and feminine. And I just felt like it's the whole sort of human experience, right? So yeah, I was hooked from that moment. And then from there, I moved back to Sydney and got work in kitchens. But you're right. I mean, back then it was more, the cuisine was looking more towards Europe. So it was very much Italian, French, Spanish kind of influence, maybe a little bit of Middle Eastern. So that was really fantastic experience at the time, and I got to work with some great chefs. But making that transition into Vietnamese food was interesting because I basically had to rewrite the rules. And one of the classic things I think of is thinking back to when I was working with those, European style chefs, if I had to put a piece of like prime fillet in a deep fryer, they would have probably submerged my face in the deep fryer after it. But moving into like an Asian style kitchen, I mean that's quite the norm, right? You'll seal the meat, the beef in oil, hot oil, and then maybe you transfer that into the wok and do your stir fry or whatever like that. So it's really, and then I guess from that moment I just decided that it's horses for courses, and whatever is true to the cuisine, and it's about the result that you achieve.
Tell us about the early days and the creation of Red Lantern, and how you transferred your skills and worked with Pauline and Luke to create such an iconic venue.
Yeah, I think I was very lucky because that European experience served me well, because by falling into Vietnamese cuisine, because obviously with the history of Vietnam, there's a very strong French influence there. So a lot of the meals, especially at home, are cooked in frying pans and yeah, almost like not so much the wok, but it's frying pans, even utilizing ovens and things like that. So I kind of understood the cooking process. I mean, the most challenging thing was getting my head around new ingredients. I mean, that was the learning curve, like new herbs, new paste, new sauces, and obviously new methods, but applied in a way that kind of made sense to me. The most challenging thing, I guess, was learning the wok, like learning how to use a wok, like how to deep fry, steam, stir fry, and just appreciating how versatile that single piece of equipment is.
One of the big features of Vietnamese cuisine is pork. Take us back to your career and what you remember of that European style of cooking pork and sort of how different it was when you started cooking Vietnamese food.
Yeah. Well, yeah, pork. So when I think back, sort of pre Red Lantern, so pork was very much cooked in. For me, my memories are very much of an Italian style, so roasted or a cutlet or cooked in milk. I remember the River Cafe. I could buy one of their cookbooks, and they had this pork cooked in milk, which like developed a curd, and it was like really amazing. So lots of people were good doing that at the time, being influenced by certain trends. But making that transition into Asian style, in particular the Vietnamese, it was like roasting porks. The marinades were really interesting. Simmering pork. It's very versatile in that cuisine. I mean, one of my favorite things is like the pork neck, the sirloin, I guess, just simmered in stock with ginger fish sauce and garlic. I mean, it's quite amazing. You end up with like a really amazing flavored stock, but then also the meat is just so delicious.
One of the things that I remember from the times that I've dined at different incarnations of Red Lantern is the pork floss. Can you tell us a bit about that dish and how do you make pork floss?
Yeah, that just blew my mind, right? that particular thing, and I think it blows many people's minds when they have it for the first time. So that again, I guess that process I just described. So you're simmering the pork until it becomes very, very tender and very fibrous, and then you separate the fibers. So just with forks, separate all the fibers out, and then you slowly cook that in a wok with some soy and some sugar and some salt, and you're basically just drying out the meat. So I guess, a wok version of jerky in many ways, but you've just separated all the fibers, so it gives you that lovely fairy floss kind of texture.
Tell us about the dish that you create using that.
Yeah, well, that was like, I guess I really love this dish, and it's still on the menu today because it was actually inspired by a dish that Luke and Pauline's auntie cooks in Vietnam at the markets, and it's traditionally a breakfast dish, and it's served with egg and spring onions. So it's a rice cake. So it's made with glutinous rice. So it's a process where it's combined with water and seasoning, and then it's spread out onto a tray and it's steamed, so it becomes like a cake, and then cut into small cakes and pan fried. And like I really like the texture is great because it's that classic crunchy on the outside and really gelatinous and chewy on the inside. So that's a texture that everyone loves. And I got to thinking about that classic combination in Asian food of pork and seafood, and then pork and prawns came to mind. And then I thought, just to put like the icing or the fairy floss on the cake, I remembered seafood back in the Crown Street days showing me how to do this pork floss, and I thought that would be a really awesome way to finish off the dish. So, it's sourced with classic nook cham and lots of peanuts and shallots and fried spring onions and so on. It's just a really classic, I'd say, almost say signature Red Lantern dish.
Take us back to the early days of Red Lantern. It was such an iconic site and tiny kitchen. Do you have any stories of where, sort of things went wrong or some real successes of that period?
Yeah. Well, what I didn't appreciate is also like this is my first adventure into, I guess, the inner sanctum of an Asian family as well. So you've got to remember I was learning a lot of things on the fly there. And one thing that I remember, a classic I didn't really appreciate, is the fact that, so a bit of backstory, Pauline and Luke's family, parents, migrated from, or arrived in Australia as refugees. And eventually they set up a kitchen, a restaurant in Cabramatta. And the father is very protective of the family recipes because, as you know, all Vietnamese restaurants offer the same sort of dish. And what distinguishes them from one another is the end result and how you achieve that result. So that might be special sauces or a special technique. And so I was really invited into the inner sanctum, being shown all these recipes, and I remember that I just mentioned Sifu. He was like a family friend, and he came into the kitchen. He was about 70 at the time, and he came into the kitchen to teach me the hardware, like the wok, and how to actually cook the food. But I wasn't aware that he wasn't privy to the recipes at that time. And, you know, we were crazy. We were so fortunate. We were crazy busy. I think we were working 7 days a week, and we were finishing after midnight and starting again doing lunch, that classic restaurant trap. And really late one night, and I was preparing the bakor, which is like a slow braised beef dish. And I had all the marinade out, and I was marinating the dish in front of Sifu. And Sifu was paying particular attention, which I thought was kind of odd. But I actually used some laughing cow cheese in this recipe. And this was apparently a great Mr. Nguyen secret ingredient, right? Which and just at a time where I'm doing this recipe, Pauline and Luke's mum and dad walks around the corner, and the guy's like 5'1", but he's so intimidating. I mean, I just remember him glaring at me, and he just said, "Luke, out here," and he just sort of gave Luke a bollocking about how dare I be showing seafood the secret ingredients and all this sort of stuff. So I quickly learned to keep the secret secret. But then, of course, a couple of years later, that all went out the window because we released our first cookbook, and which was, funnily enough, called The Secrets of Red Lantern. So all of that was out in the open anyway. Yeah,
it feels like a long time ago, but there was a series on television with Matthew Evans, who was a restaurant critic at the time, and there were 3 restaurants in Sydney sort of featured, and Red Lantern was one of them. And tell us about that period of time. What was it like being part of that, and what impact did it have on what you were doing at Red Lantern?
Oh, that was an amazing period of time, and I really loved this show. I had a great friend who was a cooking teacher at TAFE, and he used to show all these students that particular series. So the whole premise was, I guess, the chef hat system, and how you and I, and I no doubt every listener to this program know about the chef's hats. But the show really explored whether it was necessary to have a chef's hat to be a successful restaurant. So there were other restaurants that I think Aria was involved, and Matt Kemp's Matthew Moran's Aria, and Matt Kemp's Bozak was involved at the time. And they had 2-3 hats and so on. And Red Lantern had no hats, but we were just running queues all the time. So it was like a really amazing show to get an insight to the chef hat world. But also, I guess at that time we were proving that if you just do a good job and you provide great food and hospitality, then the chef's hats aren't that important. And I think now, knowing that now, and I guess then, back, every young chef wants a chef's hat. I mean, you're chasing the chef's hat, and you get sort of a bit preoccupied when you're new to the industry about thinking that's the be all and end all. But you soon realize that restaurants are not only a house of hospitality, they're also a business. So it's concentrating on the hospitality and the business is more important than concentrating on chasing a chef's hat. Although with chef's hats, certainly rewards do come.
What sort of impact did that sort of spotlight on the restaurant have on what you guys were doing, and also the popularity of the venue?
Yeah, well, that really exposed us to a greater audience, and really from that show, I'm a little struggling because I think we're talking about the period of 2003, 2005. So I'm struggling to remember the details. I'm not sure. I'm not sure whether that show, I think maybe the show came first, and then the cookbook came second. So through that show, that exposed us to a broader audience, and I guess that I dare say we sort of hijacked the notoriety of Aria and Balzac at the time, and I guess we got a bit more exposure through their reputation. But I think that also exposed us. So I'm pretty sure the cookbook came next. So then we got into the cookbook, and then further opportunities were presented to us, and fortunately we jumped on them. And as everyone's aware, Luke sort of jumped on, and he's become an international superstar. So and even with Pauline now, I mean, she's doing amazing things. So very much took advantage of the situation.
A real feature of your career has been a focus on sustainability, and in fact, you released your own cookbook. Tell us a bit about your approach there, and trying to change the machinations of a commercial kitchen.
Yeah, well, that was an interesting time because that book was released in 2011, and I was listening to a podcast of yours, and I'm sorry, the other day about a pork producer, and she was talking about how they set up their farm in about 2012, and they were moving into biodynamic practices, and it wasn't really well known at that time, right? And I was thinking that's exactly the moment where I was writing my book, because I just became really interested in how our food's produced, and at that time there was a bit of talk about climate change and carbon footprint and all this sort of stuff. So I sort of I wanted to make it conversational, and I just wanted to present I just wanted to present a side of the story, just to engage people, because no one wants to be preached to, but I just wanted to present it in a lighthearted way with a bit of background. So it really was. So I looked into how our food is produced, and I started to reach out and deal more directly with smaller producers, and we made certain changes at the restaurant. Crown Street, we had a courtyard, so I converted that into a hydroponic garden and had irrigation, so we grow a lot of our Asian herbs and a small amount of vegetables through there, and it was more, and we had composting, so we'd do all our composting. We were one of the first restaurants at the time to actually have like one of those slow cook composters where you could put meat and bones and so on into that and compost that down into an organic matter, because you couldn't put meat and bones into a traditional compost bin. So there was a lot of innovation, I guess, that we were exploring at that time, and it was just really interesting. I was really fascinated by that, and when we moved to the new premises in Darlinghurst, that didn't really provide us the opportunity to transfer all those gardens and so on. So we had to let that go. But it's kind of been an interesting road to think that was 10 years ago, and a lot of the conversations that I was talking about then we're still having now. But but it has changed. It's come a long way. It's certainly come a long way. I mean, the proliferation of farmers markets has been an amazing thing here in Sydney for consumers and chefs alike to get out and meet producers.
There was a period of time, you just mentioned the site that you're currently in, where you had both sites, the original and the site that you're in now, and running different offerings, slightly different offerings. What was that period of time like, trying to manage the success of both of those?
Well, that was a crazy time because, I mean, we're just coming out of the pandemic, but back then we were coming out of the GFC, so it was really nuts. And back before I was saying how restaurants are businesses, we were actually caught in a lease back then as well. So we were trying to operate 2 Red Lantern restaurants. We had staff of up to about 60 people, and we were young and invincible and living the dream, so we thought. But then things started to unravel a little bit, and we had to close the Crown Street restaurant. But then we were stuck with the lease, so we were paying basically 2 lots of rent, but we're paying that on the income from one restaurant. Unfortunately, we had to let half the staff go. But out of that again, we had to do something. So Porked was born. Remember the little?
Yeah. I was about to ask you about Porked.
My little foray into Porked, and when which was kind of fun. I mean, like, a lot of people thought I was just mad. I mentioned Matt Kemp before. I remember being at like a Noosa Food and Wine Festival, and he said, "Jesus, you got balls." I went, "What are you talking about?" He said, "Like opening a restaurant just serving pork." but look, that was really fun, and that was sort of slightly ahead of the curve of the low and slow sort of cooking movement that is now everywhere. And again, we sort of doing that on the smell of an oily rag, so we couldn't really invest in a lot of equipment. And we teamed up with Michael Baines from the Royal Albert Hotel, and he did like craft beer, and like it was actually really good fun. And I used to love the food. So we took inspiration. We bought as many like American barbecue books as we could, and we did as much as what we could in a combi oven. And I remember buying a small electric smoker, which worked surprisingly well. But again, it was one of those things that we managed to keep oxygen in for a couple of years, but eventually we had to let that go as well. But when we were discussing doing this show today, I went back and looked at the Instagram site, and I looked at that food, and I went, man, there was some really great food back then.
Well, I remember eating there, and you only need to take one look at me and can tell that I like more than just salad. I'm drawn to pork. Tell us a bit about because you cooked it so many different ways, and you could sort of select what you wanted to, what sort of style of pork you wanted to eat. Could you tell us about some of the different cooking methods that you had on the menu at Pork?
Yeah, well, so basically we sold everything by the 100 grams. So it was very much like a cafeteria, I guess. You got a tray, and we had everything in hot boxes. So we'd have roast pork, we'd have roast pork bellies, knuckles, we'd make sausages, we'd have braised dishes, we'd have skewers, we'd have barbecue style, and then we'd have like accompaniments like beans and slaw and things like that. But funnily enough, people tended to gravitate towards the pork offering, and there weren't a lot of vegetables on the plate. But it was really good fun because it actually, like, I'd work the kitchen with Michael, and so we'd have direct communication with the customer over the counter, and again, you just walk by and say, you'd say, I'll have a slice of that. You put it on the scale, you weigh it, and then you just add everything up at the end and say, here you go, that's $20 or whatever it was. So it was really good fun, and then you'd wash all that down with a craft beer, and what more could you really ask for?
You mentioned when you were talking about the urban cook, the greater connection that you're creating with producers and farmers. And do you have any stories of connections you've made with pig farmers?
Well, not so much with pig farmers at the time because I was dealing more with aquaculture and the cattle industry. So I had good connections through the cattle industry. But unfortunately, I didn't make that many connections with pork farmers. But again, we were still sourcing our free-range pork through Feather and Bone, I think, at that time, which was like pretty much a fledgling wholesale company at the time. They've grown on to be pretty massive now, I believe. So I mean, a lot of my connection with pork farmers was really at arm's length at that time.
What's important for you in regards to the pork that you get in, and how do you get it in?
Yeah. Well, again, I've moved away from like a big wholesaler, and I'm working with a small butcher who is again working with smaller producers around Cowra, and getting the pork through there. So, and what's interesting is obviously is like let's say pork belly. You say take in a pork belly, and you have the method. You roast it, for example, to make that really lovely crackling. But what we've discovered more recently is the fact that it really comes down to the type of the breed of pig and I guess the composition of the fat and the thickness of the skin. So there's nuances between the breeds, which is as I'm saying this, I'm thinking to myself, well, that's obvious, but it's not just like one method and one procedure suits all. So if our pork for the particular week comes from a different supplier, then maybe what we did last week won't work this week. So we have to make minor adjustments to get that crackling just right and to make it all delicious.
Are there any pork dishes that you have on the menu that you can tell us about?
Yeah, well, one of the see, I'm on this pork belly theme because Jesus, I love it. I mean, I'm always snacking on that. I'm never disappointed if we don't sell a whole pork belly one, on any given evening. But I mean, the recipe we use is actually like a Laotian recipe, which Luke discovered on one of his travels. But it's a marinade that we use that is traditionally done with smaller pork pieces. But we actually score the flesh of the pork and really rub this marinade in. So it's lots of coriander seed, lots of oyster sauce, and a few other things. And we let that marinate for 24 hours. Obviously, salt down. We actually spike and score the skin and salt that down for at least 24 hours, and then roast that up in a hot oven. So that's one that I think would be very hard to replace off our menu. The caramelized pork is always really good too, and we use that with the rice cake dish that I was describing earlier in the program. So that's another one that's just cooked in with sugar, fish sauce, ginger, garlic, and you just reduce it down slowly, and then just finish it off rapidly so that it develops a nice caramel. And you keep turning the pork in the caramel so it gets this amazing glossy caramel finish.
This period of time has forced so many people to look at other avenues to get income in, and I'm really glad you brought it up at the top of the show, your previous career before you entered hospitality. But at Red Lantern, you introduced a barber shop at the back. Tell us a bit about that idea and the creation of it within Red Lantern.
Yeah, well, during the pandemic, I just got to thinking about, also, we discussed earlier that I've been cooking for 30 years now. I mean, that's a long time in a commercial kitchen. I mean, it's really physical work, and I really believe it's a young man and woman's game, a young person's game. But I started to think, what else can I do? What else can I do? And I did actually consider setting up a barbershop off-site, but then I thought, I've got the private dining room here, and I've got friends that work in as solicitors dealing with all these sort of things. So I actually applied for a DA to turn the dining room into a barbershop during the day, and then have it as a dining room at night. So, fortunately, I managed to get that done, and it actually was working really well. So, I mean, I've really enjoyed it because I took it on as maybe an alternative so that I could do that during the day and finally get some nights off after 30 years working in the industry. And I managed to achieve that for a period of time. So basically my day would start at about 10, and I'd do clients to about 5, and then I'd set up the kitchen, help the guys in the kitchen and set them up, and then say goodbye at about 7:30 once the service was underway and everything was running smoothly. So I actually thought I was starting to live the dream, because I mean, I'm still loving the restaurant. I still love hospitality. I still love the concept of the restaurant, but I just sort of found myself, well, maybe this is my opportunity to do something else, and also move more into a mentoring role. If I can hire people to take over the kitchen and operate the restaurant and do all this sort of thing. And, I managed to actually live the dream for about 6 weeks there, I think. But then things went pear-shaped when members of my team wanted to go back to Vietnam, and after not being there for a long period of time. And then, as we all know, that, there's critical staff shortages across all industries at the moment. And so I'm back in the kitchen pretty much full-time now, and I'm still operating the barbershop, but really by appointment only when guys reach out to me via email or text. So I'm trying to keep oxygen in that business. But, when I set that up, I just started to look at the whole restaurant differently, and I decided to think of it more as a house of creativity, because the whole concept was to have the barbershop because it's licensed, to have a bar in the barbershop, to have, people drop in for a drink, a haircut, and then maybe move into the restaurant, have a dinner. Through this period, we've been able to extend out onto the footpath a little bit, so we're offering more of a street food vibe. So really, we had this whole offering throughout the building where you could, drop in for a haircut, drop in for a beer and, a banh mi or something like that, or, have a more formal dinner, or hire the private room out for a private dinner. So it just, again, it was that business, putting my business cap on, thinking, how can I best utilize this resource that we have?
Tell us about that period of time with the barber. What was the response like, and what were your skills like? How did it feel going back to that world?
Well, it's pretty interesting. I mean, I actually did a barber refresher course. So I wasn't going to jump back in and start people's, butchering blokes' hair straight off the bat. So I flew down to Adelaide and spent a week in Adelaide at this Barbers Academy, and just honed my craft. And I remember at the time, 'cause it was something that I was good at. I mean, I had quite a good career in hairstyling. I used to work for in a salon, but I worked for the Australian Opera for a period of time, and I was actually really quite good at it. But it was just something that I couldn't see myself doing long term, and that's hence the exploration and ending up in a kitchen. But I did that barber's course, and I came back, and of course, the first couple of haircuts, they went well, but I'm just that sort of person that it's never good enough. You know what I mean? I have that drive that's like, it's never good. I can always do better. I can always do better. So I got in, and I eventually, it was actually really good fun, because in my kitchen, it's very much confined for walls, whereas this, I was opening up the barbershop to a clientele. So I started meeting people from all walks of life. It was just fun to have that communication, just sharing stories. And I really forgot how much of a confessional that barbershop chair is. And remember, this is all happening with the backdrop of the pandemic. So a lot of guys were disenfranchised with relationships, had lost work, careers. They were wondering, stressing about business, the whole thing. So to actually come to my shop and to be having your haircut by me, who, has got a pretty interesting background, through dealing with all sorts of, different things in my life. So I've got a bit of world experience, just as a bit of a sounding board, and, just to feel safe in a space where you can have a haircut and perhaps a beer or a cocktail and just download a little bit, shoot the breeze. So I actually worked out that the barbershop was a really safe space, and that's what really started to float my boat. Just the hair cutting is great, and I really enjoy it, but just that connection with guys, and just it was actually a really nice feeling after because kitchens can be really quite isolating. Whereas this just exposed me to a world, and I guess it opened myself up as well. Whereas I actually started to feel more confident within myself, like just dealing with people and experience a different side of life in a way.
We're still emerging from COVID and sort of working out what might eventuate. But I love this idea of a house of creativity rather than just a restaurant. Do you have any sort of visions of what might emerge with that idea?
Yeah, I do, because I'd really love to pick up the barbershop again. So, I mean, you use that. So, unfortunately, I've got two entrances to the building: a rear lane access, which enters into the barbershop, and the front door, which is my street food offering. So, I'd love to pick the barbershop up and welcome people in, and then have, the drinking and just the fun sort of space there. And then as you walk through, you've got the main dining room, which you could offer like the Red Lantern dining experience out the front, the street food experience. But then I'd also like to open up the space to more of a venue. So if people wanted to hire the space, and we'd cater for the event, so that could be like I don't know, some sort of expose or exhibitions, or corporate events or anything like that. We could host, obviously, birthdays and anniversaries and all that sort of stuff, but just sort of have a bit more of a broader context to it, so it's more of an event space which can offer great food and wine, food and beverage packages.
Mark, I can't let you go without trying to get one of the secrets of Red Lantern with the cookery of pork. I know that the book did come out, and you are tied to the family, but is there any sort of tips or secrets, that when it comes to cooking pork, that you can share?
Well, yeah. So I mean, obviously, don't overcook it is the basic, the obvious one, right? But also the thing with pork is that if you discover a great marinade, I mean, it marinates so well. So, and I love the fact that you can have a marinade with a certain amount of sugar, and you just get lovely caramelization, which just adds to the natural sweetness and texture of the pork. So I'd say just experiment with marinades and especially char grilling, like over open flame or even a gas flame it's really delicious.
Well, Mark, it's always entertaining catching up with you, and look forward to seeing what you do in this House of Creativity at Red Lantern. We've loved having you on the Crackling today. Please keep in touch and we'll catch up again soon.
Wow, amazing. Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you.
This is The Crackling, a Deep in the Weeds production in partnership with PorkStar. I'm Anthony Huckstep. Stay tuned as we catch up with some of Australia's best chefs and pork producers to discover what makes Australian pork so special.